TriMet monthly board meeting. We're going to start the public forum right now, and it's a little later than usual. I know some of you may have come up here to participate, but we had our meeting on our budget earlier, so we're now ready to start. So as usual, this is an opportunity for folks to provide testimony to the board regarding issues of concern or ideas for TriMet. If we're not the appropriate agency, we have staff here that can help you maybe find the right people to address your issue. And after the public forum's over, if some of the issues that are brought up, staff might be able to also answer those. So we usually allocate 45 minutes for this. I don't think we're going to need that today. I think we have 4 folks signed up today, and I'm going to call you up 2 at a time. If you could limit your remarks to 3 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated. And I will say, for anybody watching, if you have information to send us, we can send it to us via email, and we will get it. If you have other information to submit this morning, we can just hand it to our secretary, board secretary, and we will all get copies of that. So with that, I'm going to call up Ron Swerin and Jonathan Hunt.
Morning.
Good morning.
Gosh, this is kind of a surprise. I've been following a couple of issues: tolling, possibility of tolling, and a possible highway route called the Western Arterial Highway. And I heard the discussion about examining north-south routes, especially in Washington County. What's called the Northern Connector in this study actually is the north-south route on Cornelius Pass and Columbia Boulevard. So it's a very cost-effective route that could be added. But in advocating that, what I've run into is the need for a way to get state funding for a study or legislative approval. So I came to you because one of the aides for one of the representatives had said it would be much better to have an agency request funding for a study of the Northern Connector. So that's why I came this morning. I think if we're examine some of the alternatives in dealing with traffic congestion in Portland, the one possibility of congestion tolling would really be a disaster for our area. And the reason is we have 2 factors that are triggering extreme traffic growth. One is the population growth, and the other is the freight growth as the U.S. economy improves. So those 2 factors combined would offset the gains of congestion tolling. I'm sympathetic to the goals of that, but as a practical policy, what we need is more capacity. If this congestion tolling idea went ahead, the result would be a huge increase over time in traffic into the Portland area, and probably calls then for something like a $20 billion project to reconstruct I-5. Either that or extremely choked densities on I-5. So the alternative of the Western Arterial Highway is a lot more cost effective. I've made this sign that I use. It kind of gets the point across. It really is a sensible idea. And some of the segments that would need to be added are still cost effective. If it needed a tunnel under Skyline, the new Austrian method would be used. This is something that really systematizes the construction of tunnels, much cheaper than the tunnel boring machine. I've also looked at bridge designs. This is more in reference to crossing the Columbia. The network tied arch bridge is very cost effective, and I've communicated with the original engineer. This is one in Waldport. This is one they built in Little Rock, Arkansas for $100 million. I'm estimating that we could have 2 bridges across the Columbia with routes for less than the CRC costs. And this would certainly be less than what we would run into if we went ahead with a congestion tolling plan, because that would create extreme traffic congestion in Portland. So please, let's find a way to get this into the legislature for a study. September is the deadline, apparently. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could, just real quickly, full disclosure, you'll probably see my name on the inside cover of that document.
This
And-
one?
Yes.
Okay.
And so this was, just so everybody knows, this is a long-term study. If you're looking at transportation in Washington County, and talk about a 50-year look. And this was just one idea that was put on the table, and I really believe Washington County is going to pursue what they want to in that. I know they've had discussions with Metro about that northern, it's actually a tunnel, as you point out, but this is a long-term fix for the future, and was mainly looked at to relieve congestion on the Sunset Corridor.
That's one purpose, yeah.
Yeah, that was, I'm just saying, that was the actually main purpose of the.
Well, Port of Portland had testified that Washington County needed additional routes.
There's no question. So I just want to point out that I think Washington County is your lead public agency, and it shouldn't be TriMet.
Well, whoever, I asked ODOT, and they just advised me that an agency would be much better in asking for a bill.
Appreciate
Yes.
appreciate you being here. Thanks. All right. Jonathan.
Good morning, President Warner and members of the board.
Morning.
Morning.
For the record, my name is John Hunt. I'm the Vice President of Amalgamated Transit Union Division 757. First, when he was hired, new General Manager Doug Kelsey made several commitments to enhance transparency and accountability at this agency. I want to provide a status update on some of the commitments from the union's perspective. Specifically, I want to express my concerns that the union has not heard a single word from TriMet on how they will be implementing any of the 12 deliverables around diversity, transparency, and more. We understand from our friends at OPAL, Environmental Justice, which organizes the region's bus riders union, that they have also not heard nothing since February. We are puzzled about why you have left transit workers and the riders in the dark. If you are serious about improving communication, collaboration, and community input regarding TriMet policies and budget, why not talk to the folks who know the system the best? We are happy to see you have committed to holding town hall meetings with frontline workers within 120 days of hiring. My estimate gives you until the end of June to hold 5 town hall meetings with 3,000 rank and file members, workers who move this region. Other than a notice that's been given out in the bullpens to reiterate your promise, we have heard nothing about when, where, or how these forums will take place. And this raises serious red flags. We get it. When you have let your relationship with workers deteriorate to the point that it can be hard to figure out how to right the ship. So we would like to help. In order to ensure that there are successful, authentic opportunities to hear from our frontline workers, we are willing to help you plan these town hall meetings. We can help you find the right time to make sure that our meetings are with every shift and every classification of worker. We can suggest locations that can make it possible for as many workers to hear from you as possible. We can suggest democratic ways of running such meetings so that you can hear honest feedback rather than cherry-picked talking points. You talk a lot about collaboration, so let's collaborate. The second topic I'd like to talk about is the agreement that the agency has been discussing with Portland Patrol Incorporated. I'll finish shortly. To create a new classification of transit police officers, to take the work of both ATU represented fare inspectors and SEIU represented G4 security. We have heard basically nothing since February about the plan for this contract. We know that our sisters and brothers at SEIU Local 49 have been told point blank no contract has been signed, and that TriMet has not provided a written justification for moving forward with a sole source contract rather than putting it out for bid. This flies in the face of our commitment to transparency.
Are you going to wrap up?
I'm wrapping up. My questions are very simple. Are you not moving forward with the contract with PPI? If so, why have you refused to share the information about this with the unions who represent your existing security code enforcement workers? And if you are not moving forward, why has the public not been informed of this fact? Doug, we are concerned that we have been what we have seen so far, but we are willing to work through these changes. You have at least a couple of opportunities in front of you to prove that you have learned from the mistakes of your predecessor, and doing so differently at TriMet. Workers and riders are watching this agency more closely than they ever have before, and the stakes couldn't be higher. I want to thank you for your time, and I would be happy to address any of these questions with any of you.
Okay, good. Maybe we can have Doug, I know he's planning on give us an update today on where he's going with some of these and what his progress is made, so I'd encourage you to hang around, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right, the next two employees, people who want to testify, Becky Heron and Susan Nowak? Nowak, okay. Good morning.
Good morning, President Warner and the board. I am Susan Nowak. I am a 17-year resident of Tualatin, and I'm here to say thank you on behalf of Tualatin, but I'd like to give you a quick background of why I'm here. I am...
But you can disregard that one, okay?
Okay. Can I have 2 minutes?
No, please.
I wrote a speech and it's not too, I'm just going to chat for a minute. I retired 10 years ago and found a niche in my new career and new world as being a community activist and a senior advocate. I am definitely a senior citizen, and I have become a voice in our community for our seniors. For those who don't speak up or can't speak up, I make sure that I do. And I do that in a way because I chair the Tualatin Aging Task Force. And some of you might be familiar with us. We have a very loud voice in Tualatin. We've worked over the last several years with TriMet specifically on projects in our community. I got started on the committee when we were negotiating to bring Ride Connection in, daytime hours. It's been there for about 5 years now. It's a hugely successful program, and we are so appreciative of having it. It has given our seniors and our residents with disabilities or no mobility to get out and about during the day. We've seen an increase in our senior center because of it. It's a wonderful staff, and we're very appreciative of that. That got me started. Then we tackled the post office because the U.S. Postal Service, in their wisdom, wanted to move our downtown location to the industrial area, which was not accessible for anyone. And the task force did a grassroots effort in the community with the chamber and the city and the city staff, and they did not move because we lobbied hard and strong. So we have a voice. Our voice is now being used to work very closely with TriMet and Metro on the Southwest Corridor, the Bridgeport project for light rail, and what we're most excited about is Bus Line 96, and that's why I'm here. We have had meetings with Linda Simmons and Tom Mills and Jennifer Kuzer and people from Metro who have willingly come to talk to our small group. We're 15 strong, but we appreciate the partnership. We appreciate the fact that you're so forthcoming with your information. You heard us and you listened and you took action, and we couldn't be more thankful because what you've done when 96 extends its routes for non-peak hours is that you have given an opportunity not only to our community but to our workforce to get in and out of Tualatin in non-peak hours, and it's vital for the health and growth of our community. that we have this, and we want to say thank you because it was.
Nicely done.
Did I do? Wow! I will tell you that's unusual. I'm a talker.
Thank you for your comments. Did you have a comment you wanted to make? Okay, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
All right, thank you, yes. Ms. Herron.
My name is Becky Herron. I work for Propel Insurance, which is located in downtown Portland. And I'm here actually just as a huge thank you to for you putting in the Hop Pass. We provide our employees with a Hop Pass free of charge. We've been doing it for a long time, or a TriMet pass of some sort. We have about 80 employees in Portland. We have about 40 that use the transit system on a regular basis, so about half, which is great. And the Hot Pass makes my life much easier. I can get online and load their passes, and it's instantaneous. I can even do it last minute if I need to. When I have a brand new employee that starts their first day, they say they want a pass, I can have it to them that day. Granted, I realize the TriMet office is very close to where my office is, but it still makes my life easier. We were one of the early adopters of it. We've been using it since last September. My employees really appreciate it, and I have several that even use C-Tran, and we're now able to load their passes that way as well. So it was really just a testimony to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So kudos to your firm and to you. Thank you very much for what you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that concludes our public forum today. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for all your comments. So with that, we're going to go right into our regular business meeting. So I'll call the business meeting, the regular business meeting of the TriMet Board of Directors for April 25th, 2018 to order. And the first thing on the agenda is the board reports. And the first board report is the Transit Equity Advisory Committee, or TEAC, as we know it. Dr. Bethel, do you have a report for us today?
Thank you, Mr. President. The last TEAC meeting, the TriMet staff provided an overview and update on TriMet's business plan. TriMet Director of Outreach and Marketing walked the TEAC members through the initial timeline for transitioning paper tickets out of Safeway and Kroger locations and making them available to community partners and nonprofits through Access Transit and the Institutional Partner Program, as well as them still being available at some of the TVMs. We also walked through the new draft charter for the expanded TEAC set to convene in May, which is going to be a great addition to TEAC, as well as to what's going to be able to help with the transparency and involvement and things for general TriMet overall. Staff also provided an update on the cross-agency efforts to successfully launch the new low-income fare program this July. Also shared the job description for the new community outreach staff position and asked TEAC members to spread the word about the opportunity. That concludes the report for this past month. If there are any questions, we will be happy to entertain.
Thank you. Any questions, Dr. Bethel? Thank you, Dr. Bethel. Appreciate that. Well, let's move on to the Finance and Audit Committee. Director Prosser.
Okay, the Finance and Audit Committee did not meet this morning because we had our hearing with the Multnomah County Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission, TSCC. Under state law, TSCC is responsible for reviewing and approving all budgets of entities located in Multnomah County, or for regional entities where the headquarters are in Multnomah County. So that includes TriMet. They had 10 questions that they provided to the board and staff, pretty wide ranging, dealing with fast pass, cost recovery from fares, measures to improve on-time performance and ridership, the status of the Southwest Corridor Plan, talking, and had some questions about positive train control, which will be implemented by December of this year. And there was $1 million increase in the general manager's office in the equity program. That's related to the implementation of the low income fare. And then also questions about our service expansions and TriMet's role, if any, in planning for Metro's affordable housing bond and status of electric buses. So wide-ranging. I think it was a good discussion. Staff did a very good job in responding. And the TSEC voted unanimously to approve the TriMet budget.
Since we were all there, do we have any further questions or comments for Director Prosser? All right, thank you very much, appreciate it, Craig. Are you also able or would like to give us a quick update on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee?
Yes, Metro Policy Advisory Committee, MPAC, last met on April 11th. On the agenda was discuss the regional housing measure update and basically give a status report to MPAC on where that stands in the planning process. And then had a very interesting discussion actually about trends behind the regional population forecast, migration and demographic changes. That was a panel of several people, including from OPB, Portland State University, and Pacific Northwest Economics. Basically, what they reported is the recession is well past, and job and population growth have now returned to pre-recession levels. National, state, and regional unemployment rates are nearing full employment. So hopefully that will help people still looking for jobs, greater opportunity to find one. Real estate prices rising, showing a growing economy, and prices for homes are also growing. That's another indicator of a strong economy. So it was a good discussion, good information. So that's it.
Questions, comments? I guess I would just say on the growth issue, I was in Bend over the weekend and had an opportunity to speak with them and learned that Bend is now the fastest growing city on the entire West Coast.
Wow.
Amazing, yeah. Thank you, Director Prosser. Well, let's move right on to the General Manager's report. Mr. General Manager, you want to introduce the item?
Great, thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. In my General Manager's report this morning, there will be several areas I'd like to cover with you. One is review the March ridership report. We'll check in with, get Dee Brookshire to come up and review our last quarterly finance report. Give you a more of an enhanced and critical timeline of key issues, particularly coming at the board here with the Southwest Corridor project, a little bit more than this morning at the TSCC hearing you heard about. We'll also outline some of the recent developments in our low-income fare program. I will give some comments on the 100-day plan that I'm working towards, as you had mentioned earlier. And I'd also like to take a couple minutes to recognize a couple employees here that have done just some tremendous efforts at work and in the community. So, firstly, in terms of the ridership report, TriMet provided about 8.3 million rides. That's down about 2.5% over March of last year. The riders took more than just over a million trips, 1.1 million trips by bus, which reflects a slight decline of about 1.7%. Peak bus ridership dropped a little more than 3% as we kind of break down the numbers a little bit further. There was a slight uptick in the weekend ridership overall, but essentially statistically flat right now. We'll see some more, I think, enhancements. We put more bus service in place, et cetera, so that will unfold later. The frequent bus day service is down 3.5% year to date. We did see a much smaller dip on the weekend frequent service of less than a percentage point, so that was better news. Trips on the frequent service bus lines, they make up about 54% of all the bus rides. We provide about 750,000 weekly trips on MAX. That's a decrease of about 4% over this time last year. The weekday ridership on the Orange Line dipped in March by about 3.4%. However, the weekend ridership increased by about 6% over the last same period last year. We have about 77,000 weekly trips on West, and as was related to the TSCC report, this is a concern for us, the drop in ridership. They're down more than 13%. In this particular case, we also have had some significant rail work going on, rail industry called work blocks, if you will. So we know that's been part of it, but this is still very much on the watch and the concern list for us. And as I mentioned at the last board meeting, we are undertaking a bunch of extra marketing efforts here to say, how do we, with some of the employers who've left the area and their employees who use the system, how can we shore that up? So a lot of work's going on in that area. Next, I'd maybe like to call up Dee Brookshire if she could, and I'll just cover off the financial highlights from the last quarter's performance.
Please.
Doug, I just want to follow up on kind of the ridership. Of course, that's one of the key things that, one of the key metrics that as an agency, as a board, we look at and want to be cognizant of. As we look at, and I know we've looked at various points of information in regards to the decline. We have an understanding this decline that we're seeing is a national trend. And we can look at data all day long and try to analyze what we have going on. You know, when I look at this, you know, there's sometimes, and I'm going to ask a question that we may not currently have the answer to, and let me add one more thing. Basically, as I have understood it, our decline is actually less than what we're seeing nationally. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of these assumptions or comments that I'm making. Is there any type of notion that at some point, as an agency, we reach a capacity that then from there, and unless we do things that dramatically improve or increase capacity, we essentially hit this peak and then we don't come back. And what I mean by that is, you know, I primarily ride the MAX, and at peak times, I mean, it's absolutely full. You know, I rode in this morning. There's a little bit more room, but as I ride back this afternoon, I can tell you that it's going to be standing room only, and that's consistently what I see. So the here to decline, I don't necessarily always see it when I ride. As a matter of fact, I was coming from the airport, I think it was last month at 11 o'clock at night, and I was surprised at how full the MAX was even at 11 o'clock. And so to have the experience that I get when I ride, and of course I'm riding the blue line between here and Gresham, which is probably the busiest portion of our entire system in regards to the MAX. I mean, what I'm experiencing in actuality and what I'm hearing in these numbers, you know, tend to not match up somewhat. And so I'm just wondering if you know, some of what we see is this peaking out of our system at those peak times, and then so the off peaks, you're not just going to see much of a rise, but then the peak times we see a potential decline because of the experience of not being able to grab a seat or something to that effect.
Well, maybe thank you. Maybe I provide a couple comments. The first one is our decreases for me are more of a softening than structural. I'm going to put West on the side for a second. I think that's more a deeper cut, if you will, particularly over multiple years. But I think if compared to national trends, many agencies, or a number of agencies at least, are at the 10-15% type of ridership decline, somewhat we're actually seeing on the west side of things. So ours are in the, I'll call the 1 to 2% general range right now. So for, I think this is where HB 2017 is going to very much help us on a number of fronts. One is we know we have pass-ups in some of our peak hours. These are some of the on the bus side, you can see just here in the numbers, that's going to help us a lot. And as soon as we can get there, we've got to place the orders, things of that nature. So that's one piece. The other one, I think, is also through the hop card. As we get this implemented, there'll be other things that we can do to help encourage ridership in some of those off-peak periods for those who historically have ridden the peak. We still have capacity on selective routes and a lot of parts of the day. So we need to try and shore some of that up, particularly off-peak periods. This is also, I think, why we need to still finish a lot of the work on reliability. So people can plan their time to eliminate some of the buffers of not knowing. So that if we can continue to improve our precision, they can make choices with more precision on their end as well. So I think that would give people some more confidence in maybe picking the edge of the windows outside some of those windows. And yes, as we over time get to the extension of the red line, to Fairplex that we spoke a bit about this morning, with that will come some more rail cars on the rail side specifically. So I think on a number of those fronts, yes, we're part of an industry challenge and phenomenon, and I think we will see ridership, I believe, come back. I don't think this is, to me, if I look at this on a long-term basis, having been in the private sector for many years, some 2% is not structural, but we want to take a long-term lens on the other services we need to put in place to give people more options on their terms, not ours. I think some of the other services, like 24-hour service that we spoke about today, that's going to open up an avenue of a market that we don't hit today. So I think we may have to look at ridership in other periods of the day, but I think we will have to look at some of the tactics of the peak ridership, particularly on MAX, over time, particularly on that blue line.
Please.
I appreciate that, Doug. And ultimately, my next comment is not a critique about what we're doing, although it is something that I think should draw our attention to looking at really what can we really do to affect the positive change. And what I mean by that is that, as we look at our decline, which is slight in comparison to what's going on nationally, I also take a look at what we've done in the contrast to positively impact ridership. We haven't raised fares in 6+ years, I believe we're at now, maybe just at 6 years. Right. So fares have been the same for 6 years. I mean, and based on what I sometimes hear, that should be something that should naturally increase ridership because, as we all know, things begin to become more expensive year in and year out, although the cost of actually taking a ride has stayed the same for almost 6 years. So that, in the natural sense, should be a positive. We increased the transfer time from 2 hours to 2.5 hours, which we were told by the advocates of that would increase and positively impact our ridership, which, I always say start with the end in mind. So I'd love to actually, if there's any way that we can measure the change, if there's a change or impact, it may be hard to do, but if we could measure the change or the impact of that 2.5 hour or the half-hour addition to the transfer time, that would be interesting to understand what we've implemented in the positive or just the overall impact from that. But as I look at those things, as I look at the concept of improved reliability, we've gone from in the mid-70s up to over 90%. That's another positive change that, in my mind, based on what you just said, should positively impact ridership. We have done some significant things, and then the hop pass in regards to, I don't think this gets mentioned enough, but the idea that we have the fare capping in place is a tremendous benefit to our riders and our stakeholders in regards to, the decreased overall cost of transit, specifically, I think, for low-income riders. Because they're generally the ridership that tends to have to buy it on a day-to-day basis. So as I look at the compilation of all of those positive changes, and still we have a negative or just an overall decrease in our ridership, I sit a little bit befuddled at making sure that the steps that we're looking at taking in the future actually will positively impact our numbers. And it'll be interesting. I know we've got in the briefing today, Bernie's going to give us an update on kind of that annual survey that we do to understand what the folks feel about us. So and one of the things historically has been, on-time performance. So it'll be interesting as we continue to move forward to measure the things that we're putting in place to ensure that we're getting the results that we desire. But we've done a lot of positive things, and we've still seen. And now maybe that's the mitigating factor in the fact that we've seen a significantly decrease or significantly smaller decrease in our ridership than what folks have seen nationally. And those positive things may have contributed to that. But I'm fascinated by the fact that we've done some sweeping things, or in the sense of fares, we haven't raised them, which has actually just naturally over the last 6 years decreased the actual cost of transit from a real dollar perspective. So I'm I sit here, again, a little bit befuddled as to the things that we need to continue to do to ensure that ridership either, stays stable throughout this time or starts to increase.
I might just add a couple of comments to sort of the list I kind of went through with you and what you just added on. So I thought you made some great comments. I think there's still work to be done, and often just when you fix on-time performance doesn't mean people all of a sudden show up right away tomorrow. Sometimes there's a bit of a longer lag. I do think we have unfinished work on our safety and security presence on the system, and even though our statistics show that people, we'll see this in some of the attitude awareness survey today, they do feel safe and secure in the system. There's still some that perhaps don't, and I think sometimes numbers are helpful, they're directional, but I do feel that's a gap we need to be more robust at. So I think there's plans underway, as you know, in our budget that will come forward to you to do things just like that. The other one that's in our business plan is also, I think sometimes you have to follow your instinct as well, where the data doesn't always tell you everything. And I think we need to look at some of our bus routes that are out there. And some people are moving, I believe, instinctively suburban to suburban, not just all lining up to come in through the spokes of the wheel into the downtown central business. Yes, there's a lot of that, but I do think we live more of a pickup sticks kind of world, for those who can age themselves through knowing what pickup sticks actually are, where it's more in multiple directions. And so I think once we get the hop card in place, to me it's far more than a revenue collection tool. Yes, it is that, but it is also a tremendous aggregate data tool that will help us on understanding true origin and destination customer points that will help us over time maybe look to realign some of our routes that we think are right, but maybe need adjustments. So I really do believe that will make us closer in sync to more actual volumetric travel patterns, not just individual ones. So I think there are some things, the safety, security, and those that would add on top, but I don't think those are short-term fixes. I think those are more structural, long-term strategies, as you see outlined in our business plan.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I knew you didn't know, before you didn't want to, I know you wanted to get down to the next issue, but I think this is important because all the things you said are right on.
Yeah.
I mean, we do need to understand what's happening with ridership and where we want to go in the future. And I would just comment that I think Bernie's presentation will provide some insight, especially on the ride sourcing side, which is something I think is really interesting. And Doug and I have talked about it. If I had the numbers right, I don't know whether they're right, maybe Alan or Bernie could talk about that, but I think the city of Portland was shocked with the amount of revenue they received from their 50-cent a ride tax on Uber and Lyft. And my math, that was a significant amount of trips. I think the number was 6.5 million is what I remember. Correct. And at 50 cents, that my math goes about 12 million trips. Or 13 million trips. So I think there's some things going on in just the lifestyle, technology, and other things, and I think the attitude and awareness survey gives us a little insight into that, but not a lot. And so I agree with you, Doug, that the learning where our customers are, what they want, and where they're going is going to be very important. But I think we're right on the midst of some big changes in terms of just the way people travel as a result of technology. And so I'm looking forward to kind of exploring how we fit into that in a big way. And so this is a lot longer discussion, but since you started it, I thought I would follow up. So thank you. I look forward to that dialogue later.
Okay, thank you. Dee, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, President
morning.
Warner and members of the board. So let's talk about the financial highlights of the third quarter of the fiscal year, which ended on March 31st. Kind of on the downside, our total revenues were under budget by $15.4 million at 3.8%. These are combined primarily of two things. One is the payroll tax revenue collections are slightly below budget at $10.8 million, and as we just discussed, the passenger revenue is down $5.7 million. In fact, we recognize that our passenger revenue expectations in the budget were a little too optimistic, and so we will be writing down the expectation by year end.
Excuse me, Dee.
Yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, what are we doing here? Let's go there. Okay. Okay, but on the good side, the total operating expenses were below budget by 11.5 million. We've highlighted the operating expenses. The net results from operations overall of 16 million it's below budget by 3.9 million, which is basically under budget. I mean, we're under our expectations. So move on. Let's see. Okay, so another few features. We've got the payroll tax and the passenger revenue. Covered that. We're highlighting the system operating expenses area, although in your report on page 2 and 3, there are other areas of the budget that we're showing under budget in some of the expense areas due to timing of expenditures that some seasonal in nature that we expect to come basically roaring back in the fourth quarter. But the system operating expenses were 3.5% under budget, 8.5 million, which makes up the bulk of it. Some of the features of that included 1.3 million over budget in the operations group, $500,000 over budget in transportation and personal services, 1.3 under budget in the ATP direct services and ATB backup, and as you'll see from the narrative, like for example, public affairs was under budget by 1.3, safety and security under budget by 2 million, and information technology under by 1.5, and so on. So altogether, it came to our 11.5% under. Operating project expenses, which is a relatively small piece of our overall capital plan, at 5.3 million, or 46% under budget. So again, due to timing. So we've made these reports incredibly brief. If you would like more information in these reports, please let me know, and we can expand on any part of it. If you have any questions now, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions by the board? Go ahead. Who's going first?
I'd like to back up to the operating project expenses.
Yes.
Being so much under budget due to timing. And what that suggests to me is that we're not doing as good a job as we probably should be doing in terms of our project planning. And what are we going to do about aligning our project schedules more closely with reality?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's something that's, while this is a very small microcosm of the overall CIP, we did spend 55% of it, so we've got, or 54%. So by the end of this fiscal year, this small amount of money is probably going to be diminished, if not completely expend. The larger picture of our larger CIP does indicate that we do over budget in many project areas compared to our delivery system. So our ability to deliver on the projects in the schedule that we have currently planned in our budget is something that we are really focusing on very intently in terms of figuring out why are we doing this. I mean, obviously, as a finance man yourself, it looks like bad budgeting. And so what we're doing is taking a closer look at what our capital requirements, our cash requirements are compared to all the constraints that currently are keeping us from spending the money as we expect to. Permitting is something that comes up from time to time. So we are looking at scheduling the permitting expense to deliver, including the delays, in the time frame in which we expect it to be spent. So again, it's something that we are looking at very closely, and we meet on it on a regular basis. And so, Doug, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add on that.
Yeah, I think this is an area sometimes where our eyes are bigger than our stomach, and where we get down to the projects that I see in the capital management process here, where they're all legitimate, boy, they're all important, but you get down to the human capacity to execute internally in addition to some of the variables on the outside, our partners, i.e. permitting has actually recently been a real challenge for us, because, for example, our partners in different municipalities are running in some cases up to a year behind in their actual issuing a permit. So we link our timing to them as one example. So we are investing in enhancing, understanding those relationships with project management better, but we definitely need to close the gap, I call it, between on cash flow or ask versus spend, if you will. And I think we've, right now, last year we were in the, similar to other transit agencies, we've actually checked with others. Right now, last year we were around the 40% mark. This year we're tracking about 25%. So we're heading back down, I think, on some of the gap, if you will. But this is something we really need to keep ahead of us, particularly as we see future demands that will come to this board around, we have to replace the Type 1 vehicles, we have to do our Powell Street garage. There's a lot of significant capital between state of good repair and expansion that's coming our way. So this is one of the levers I think management needs to tighten up on.
There are some expenditures that are very easy to predict. Our bus purchases, for example, we know we need approximately $20 to $30 million every fall when the next bus group comes in. The others that involve the work of others, consultants and others, it's harder to predict.
As Dee pointed out, I've had a lot of experience in the local government finance field, and one of the constants through all the various places I've worked is lining up capital expenditures and capital budgets. It's a really tough one. And I always kind of go back to the old Star Trek, Scotty's method of success, which was to under-promise and over-deliver. And unfortunately, through my career, what I've seen is what we tend to do is to over-promise and under-deliver. And so we have this nice list of projects or CIP or whatever, and they address problems that are out there that people are concerned about, and we point to it and say, oh yeah, see, we're going to get it done, and then we don't. So for me, it's that perception issue for our customers and for the public.
Good comment. Go ahead.
So Dee, could we go back a slide on the revenue side of things? So we basically, so we have two main areas of revenue miss on the passenger revenue, which is, we kind of have some background on what's going on there. But on the payroll side of things, the payroll tax side of things, how much of that is timing in regards to, when the payroll tax is paid, and how much of that is because I'm assuming that employment is remaining about 4% unemployment and about 96% employment. So I'm not hearing the numbers going the other direction.
Sure.
To substantiate that much of a miss.
Well, that's why I said payroll tax collections, because we, in the fourth quarter of the year, we receive a big bunch of money from the payroll tax. So the self-employment tax and others, they lag as far as a collection standpoint. But the good news is that the payroll tax overall is 4.2% higher than last year at this same time. So we believe the trend is still up. And you're right, employment in the region is still robust, and it's expected to continue that way. So we're not expecting a decline. We're actually working with the state on their collection program, because we pay them millions of dollars from our payroll tax, at least $3 million a year, to administer the collection of the payroll tax. And unfortunately, they don't seem to have this as a priority like we do. And so I think that we are actually engaging them. I know they are. We have staff going over there from time to time to find out what they're doing. So we're on top of that. We don't expect it to be hugely under budget by the end of the year.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Good.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Dee. I'd now like to move, as part of the General Manager's update, to talk about the Southwest Corridor update. And so, and as we've talked about riders here already this morning, so talking about new opportunities, Southwest Corridor is a really big one. It's a long-term one, but it is big. It's a project that's nearing an important milestone, the publication of what we call the DEIS, or the Draft Environmental impact statement. This DEIS, is a decision-making tool required under federal law that outlines how a particular project will affect the human environment, the people around it. Once published, it will be shared with the public for review and comment on the alternatives under consideration for the light rail between Portland, Tualatin, and Tigard. In the coming months, the board members, you will have an opportunity to hear the testimony from the public and their perspective on this, how this new line will affect them. You'll also be making some key decisions that are coming up, one of them being the adoption of what we call a LPA, or a locally preferred alternative, later this year. So Leah Robbins, and I don't know if Dave Unsworth is able to join you today.
No,
So
Dave is
Leah's
following.
our resident expert who's going to help us and cover off with you the latest update on the Southwest Corridor. So Leah.
Great. Thank you, board members, for the opportunity to give you a broader update on the Southwest Corridor project. Steve Witter touched on it last month. So I want to provide some details, and if there's time, or if you have detailed questions, we should have some time for that. I want to remind you of the kind of long time frame on these projects. Right now, the Southwest Corridor, a 12-mile corridor, is in the midst of the environmental review process. And the corridor itself, we anticipate by 2035, 70,000 more residents, 30-minute reliable trip from Bridgeport Village to Portland State University that is in conjunction with probably anywhere from 13 to 17 hours of congestion during a typical day. So this project will provide reliable transportation for the Southwest Corridor. We anticipate by 2035, 43,000 riders on the alignment. And for this major milestones this year, as Doug described coming up, we in March have identified an initial route proposal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, which will be included in the draft environmental impact statement, targeted to be issued by June. And that kicks off a public review process that will culminate in a steering committee recommendation, and that includes all of our partners, with Doug being our TriMet representative. And then October, intending to be back here at the board for the adoption of the locally preferred alternative. And then the final adoption process is complete with the Metro Council at the end of the year, November. There are some specific board actions coming this year. In addition to the October locally preferred alternative adoption, we will be back here in May with an amendment to our transit design contract, and that is a TriMet contract that will bring the design of the project through to the 30% level down the road. And this is all funded by federal dollars through an agreement with Metro, and fully funded through project development. We also anticipate an additional contract for the urban design elements of the project that will kick off after the locally preferred alternative is adopted, so towards the end of the year. A little bit more on the picture of how we get through this really broad DEIS to a locally preferred alternative. Many of you have participated in this in the past in many other roles, but the publishing of the EIS is an important piece that looks at all of the impacts of the alternatives under consideration. And we have a community advisory committee and a steering committee that provides input to that ultimate recommendation for a preferred alternative. And when we say preferred alternative, that's one route with a series of stations and park and rides defined as the project. And that then moves from the steering committee to all of our jurisdictional partners for adoption, so including the City of Portland, City of Tigard, Tualatin, Washington County, ODOT, and TriMet and Metro. The initial route proposal is a new piece required by the Federal Transit Administration as an attempt to provide more focused comment during the EIS comment period. And it's not the final preferred alternative, but it is a staff-developed proposal that looks at the overall route, which we've identified as a through route. How do we connect to Portland State and our existing alignments? We do that through a Barber alignment. And we've identified the Barber versus I-5. We'll look at some of these details in a minute. And the Ash alignment through Tigard and a railroad alignment down to Bridgeport Village. You see these also note potential modifications. Through the review process to date, we've identified some design modifications that would be looked at further during the final environmental impact statement. The through route provided better connectivity, better passenger service in terms of understanding which train to get on versus a branch route. And it also, significant to TriMet, had lower ongoing operating costs and more reliable service. The Barber alignment is a shorter connection to Markham Hill. Markham Hill is one of the highest on this route, ridership stations. And there's a station planned at Gibbs Street, which provides vertical and horizontal connection up to the hill as well as down to South Waterfront. It's a faster travel time and has relatively fewer impacts to historic and property impacts than the NATO alignment. Those were the two choices in that section. One of the things that our partners have noted is that we want to continue to discuss a regionally significant project at the bridgehead, which was connected to the NATO alignment. So partners right now are looking at what it would take to connect the neighborhoods and still maintain regional transportation connectivity with the bridgehead. That is separate from the light rail project. Moving forward to the next section, continuing with the Barber alignment versus running adjacent to I-5. This was seen as having more accessible stations in the center of Barber Boulevard, more connectivity improvements along Barber, and fewer residential displacements. Still, as you'll see with the EIS, there are property impacts, but fewer residential displacements. In this area, our partners have identified the importance of a jurisdictional transfer from ownership of that roadway, the roadway authority, from ODOT to the City of Portland. As we connect to Tigard, there were two alternatives, the Clinton alignment and the Ash alignment. Both had different series of issues in terms of connecting the downtown and the Tigard Triangle. And all partners had agreed to look at the Ash alignment, but here noting some significant design modifications that partners want to see. This alternative did have residential impacts and a business community impact that our team has looked at modifying the design in a way that meets the project needs, but reduces those impacts to those two pieces of the community. And we note those as an Elmhurst design and a Hall station design. So we continue to work with our partners in Tigard to make sure that the project reduces those impacts, but also maintains a fast ridership through route to Tualatin. And
excuse me, Lee,
yes,
if I may, I'm just curious. One of the issues for Tigard has been railroad crossing, and lots of reasons why it's very difficult to get a new railroad crossing. And so, does this alignment need to cross the railroad, or does it?
This alignment doesn't in itself cross the railroad. It does require, regardless of which alternative we chose from Tiger to Tualatin, and I can touch on it now and in the next one, requires us to run adjacent to the Portland Western and operating environment. We do continue to work with Tiger to study an ash crossing, which is a new crossing that they would like to see in downtown. But in the section from Tiger to Tualatin, the two alternatives, I-5 adjacent and railroad adjacent, the railroad adjacent alignment, while requiring us to purchase property from the railroad, Union Pacific, it has fewer displacements, fewer business relocations, fewer traffic impacts for some of the crossings. So our partners agree with that, and we see that even with some risk of a railroad purchase, that that is noted as the initial route.
Thank you.
So when the DEIS is published, we have a very detailed plan for community engagement, both led by Metro and with support from TriMet staff as well as our partner staff. And we anticipate that work will really kick off this summer and will help get us to those recommendations and land the locally preferred alternative this fall.
Good.
So I can take more questions if you have them.
Other questions? Very good briefing, by the way.
Yeah.
Just the right level. Yeah, go ahead.
How long does the EIS last? How long is it open?
This would be a great question for Dave, or maybe Steve.
He told me to ask you.
Oh, perfect. He's live streaming in Bali.
Oh, on research mission, I'm sure.
Would
Right.
it be best for us to maybe get back to you with that?
Perfect.
I know that came up on the CRC.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
The second question, on the public engagement, is there a public engagement just for small businesses along that route? So it's not mixed with, say, youth or seniors, or so just so they can express.
Absolutely. And I don't have it up here with me, but we are reaching out to chambers and other of the business community groups, providing direct presentation as well as inviting those groups to participate in the broader engagement. So
Are you reaching out to the owner of Jiffy Lube on Barber Boulevard, for instance?
Right.
And next door is, 7-Eleven and
right.
the
So
Schwab, and,
to date, we have informed every property adjacent to Barber Boulevard within the reach, and that engagement will only grow as we narrow the alignment.
All right. Thanks.
Great.
Yes, please.
I have a question. Going back to your slide 8, where you referenced the connection to OHSU being horizontal and vertical.
Yes.
Is the vertical, is that the tram that we're talking
No.
about, or is it something else?
Right. Thank you. So regardless of which alignment alternative we chose, whether it was NATO or Barber, a significant connection is whether it's an elevator and structure or a pedestrian tunnel with an elevator, there's a pedestrian connection that the project intends to build from Barber up to Markham Hill. So we have multiple design alternatives that are not being narrowed right at this moment because they're all will be part of a additional public process after the locally preferred alternative.
And does OHSU have a preference on what that would look like?
Well, we continue to have detailed discussions with the highest level of OHSU as well as the overall Markham Hill campus to make sure that the connections get to public access as well as to where employees and people getting to campus need to be.
Good, thank you.
Speaking of OHSU, when they build out the night center down there, I've heard like between 750 to 1,000 new employees down there. Does that sound about right? And how are we going to move them? That's
Well, I don't have the detail for the number of,
I don't need the exact.
but there continues to be development on the Hill as well as in South
Yeah.
Waterfront, and so the connectivity to both South Waterfront and up on the Hill are really important, and the Gibbs Station area connects to the existing overcrossing of I-5 and to the further down to the tram connection. But that's why this project connection really completes that all the way from the Hill to South Waterfront and our riders at that station area.
Yeah, I think it's really smart. I mean, you have to put some type of a stop on Barber to go up to the Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of going all the way down to there and then back. So that would sure help sell a lot of things, not only for the people who work there, but, the patients or
Right.
visitors.
Right.
Thank you. Thank
Right.
you.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great presentation. Just next part of the general manager's report is I'd like to, if John Gardner could come up to talk about the low-income fare. As you're well aware, Board, we're very committed to the low-income fare program rolling out July 1st of this year. So that is exactly 2 months and one week away from today as we speak. And John, as our Director of Diversity and Transit Equity, has been working overtime with his team to get this program up, established, and running. And what's really important is to make sure, so part of success is that, in fact, the broader community knows how to use it, not only as it develops. So, John, if you could just walk through the latest update you've got.
All right. Good morning, President Warner, members of the board. So I'll be brief. I mean, like Doug said, we have about 10 weeks before we go live. I will only say that it's not July 1st, it's essentially July 2nd, where we'll have actual locations where people can go, which is a Monday, where they can go and begin registering. So very briefly, what you see here is an actual copy of what the card's going to look like on the right? We're going from paper to the e-fare card, which of course is one of the reasons we can actually implement the low-income fare program. And as you know, it's been a labor of love. It's certainly been a labor for the last 5 years. TriMet has been working slowly but surely towards this reality of a new low-income fare program. My department had the fortunate luck of inheriting work that first John L. Bell did, but also Bernie Bottomley, who developed the initial strategy for a regional coalition to go after this program. So very excited that we were able to do that with the support of the community. So where we're at now is it's all finishing touch work. So this is just a quick little snapshot about what the actual website's going to look like. The whole idea is that people can go online and understand very easily how to engage with the program, where to go, what are the rules, how do they sign up. We're calling it sort of internally the Transit Assistance Program, but obviously it's a low-income fare program, right? But it's really just an expansion of the Honored Citizen Fare that allows for folks up to 200% of federal poverty to qualify for access to that fare. So we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. 3 steps. Gather your documents, and on the website you'll see all the different documents that allow you to demonstrate your eligibility. Apply to one of the locations. We hope to have 12 sites July 2nd for folks to go across the Tri-County area to actually register, and then go down to the TTO office and pick up your card. In the future, we hope to be able to do sort of remote signups where we can take photos and then send people their cards. But initially, for the first quarter or 2, I think it's all going to be registration in the community, go to the TTO office, and pick up your actual card. So what we're doing in terms of community outreach and engagement is last month I spoke to about 60 organizations who are very excited and chomping at the bit, folks who really want to sign up their clientele and their customers to this opportunity. But we're also going to be convening, sort of as a follow-up, a lot of nonprofits over the next in May, essentially, in what we're calling transit equity forums, where we're going to discuss not just the low-income fare program and how they can connect to communities, but also HOP and how that's working and how they can make the most of that, as well as reminding them and talking through some of the changes and the improvements we've made related to decriminalizing fare enforcement. So it's sort of a little bit of a symposium. The low-income fare program is the core of that, but it's meant to sort of just connect with these communities about a range of issues. So we've invited invited about 160 organizations. We're doing one in each of the counties. And then we'll follow that up with sort of direct agency presentations on how to register their clients specifically for the low-income fare program. But again, we're making this as seamless and as easy as possible for folks. So this has been, one of those good old cross-agency collaborations, and it wouldn't have been possible with just help from almost every division at TriMet. So again, special shout out to Dee Brookshire, who's leveraged the expertise of Chris Tucker and Ryan Schaub in helping us sort of project manage this through to completion, and we've been able to leverage a lot of the lessons learned in the development of the HOT program and sort of the outreach and the connecting to the community. So this goes without saying that this has been all full court press, whole team effort, and we're so close. So the next steps are really just to complete the site application registration process with the targeted agencies we want to have launch the program, completing the registration website, doing our internal staff training specifically for operators and fare enforcement staff so they understand the process and what to expect. We'll be doing a beta test, similar to HOP, but obviously much smaller scale, working with 4 agencies across the region to sort of see what the experiences are for folks in late May and early June, to how the card's operating, what people are experiencing, what they're feeling, any sort of modifications we might make to sort of the eligibility process before we actually launch. And then we'll be doing a series of formal partner trainings all through the end of May until we actually start in July 2nd, and then ongoing as well. And although we're only starting with around 12 sites, we expect to be adding sites every month, certainly by every quarter. So every quarter I'll hopefully be able to come to you and talk to you about how the registration map is increasing and how more coverage and more access is available as well. So that's where we're at. The low-income fare program manager actually starts Monday, so we'll have some increased capacity, but so far so good. Questions?
Questions for John?
I do have a quick
Okay,
question.
sure.
How often do participants have to requalify?
Every 2 years. So I think that we've aligned it basically to the honor citizen program a little bit. So we're trying to ease the issues at the registration sites, but also make it easier for folks. And for folks who might have the opportunity to kind of connect to employment or training and transition out of the project, we see this as just a cycle of folks coming into the program as well.
Is that consistent with what you've seen some, like Seattle? Is that what they?
Basically, I mean, some programs, depending on what they connect with certain federal or state poverty resources, you're eligible for 6, 12, 18 months. So we figured, again, just like how we're trying to do a umbrella of ways to qualify, sort of having 2 years seemed like the right amount of time.
Okay. Other comments? John, way to go. I'm looking forward to this, and
Thank you.
hope it all goes well. And they pull the trigger or turn the switch on, I guess.
Thanks, John. Next up, just again to tie into latest update on my 100-day plan deliverables with you. As part of my agreement with you, I committed to you and the organization to deliver on some enhanced communications in coordination with our employees and the community. The dates and the times are now set for the 7 community listening sessions. There's one scheduled in each of your own districts, so thank you all for your commitment to individually participate in those. And I'll be participating, of course, for each and every one of those as well. The list specifically is actually in your packet that you have before you with actual dates and times. These listening sessions will provide an opportunity for the public to get to know you, to get to know me, for us to listen and obtain feedback on a variety of topics. And the intention is for these to continue on into the future as well. We'll also provide our riders and the public at large a chance to ask questions, bring up concerns, and help bring forward ideas that might help shape the future of the agency. We are also finalizing the workflow for the 4 workshops, the budget workshops, which will begin shaping the priorities for House Bill 2017. So that work is underway now. To help us in establishing dates and such, we have contract with IRCO. It's the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization. In fact, specifically to help us design and facilitate these workshops. So it's not just TriMet doing it by itself. We want to engage others, perhaps contrary to some of the public opinions that were stated at the public delegation. They did bring in a number of other community organizations to help foster the conversation around best implement HB 2017. That included the POIC, or the Portland Opportunities Industrialization Center, SEI, the Self-Enhancement Incorporated, Centro Cultural, Elders in Action, and Ride Connection as examples. So as you can see, we're working at this. There'll be some adaptations as we go through it, but we're trying to be invested in a broader approach than perhaps we historically did. And on a final note about the deliverables as pledged, we've now successfully expanded TIAC. We're now, through John Gardner's good work, out contacting those who would be on that advisory committee. We will be bringing forward to them some of the first meeting dates are already set, so happy to provide those to John Hunt and others through JC Venata and or John Gardner. The first meeting of the expanded group is scheduled for May 17th. So, and then they will be monthly meetings, because we're actually going to try and accelerate a couple up, because we want to really engage and have some of the conversations, just including things like PPI that was asked earlier. So the contract for PPI has not been signed and executed. There have been discussions going on, but we want to take that specifically as one of many topics to the Safety and Security Subcommittee, which Director Simmons has kindly offered to be involved with. We appreciate her participation in that. So those dates are coming out. So this is all unfolding very, very quickly per the 100-day plan. As well, on the 100-day plan, also the job just got posted this week for, under John Gardner's area, a supplemental community outreach person. So we are on task to meet that commitment as well. We expect hopefully a really good application pool. So we're actually pretty excited about that one as going forward. In terms of the internal outreach, so originally in my agreement with you, I committed to 6. I have already done 9. So I'm actually doubling that. So I've got 2 more transit police to do, and I'm doing another one at Center Street. Some of them have even been set up to manage shifts, so been out there at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning on some shifts to manage when the overlap of the shift occurs. So we at least have a chance for those who want to participate. In some cases, I remember one of them where members, actually elected members of the union, have actually participated, so which is terrific. And had, I think, 60 to 100 at one of them. Did a walkthrough, for example, very specifically at one of the garages at the sign-up, so it wasn't even a formal one. I said, let's just go into the bullpen, if you will, in the bus side. So walked around, some have gone from an hour to an hour and a half, and just walking around talking about what's working, what's not. So trying to provide a variety of forums of ways that people feel comfortable they actually can talk about some of the issues. So the dates are available, they're all posted, we're on our way. They also included the Portland streetcar, included Wes, and so trying to do this as large as net as we can, well beyond the 6 that I spoke to you about. So I think it's very important. It's also something I chose to do at the front end before I go out to the public. I thought to connect with our own employees, yes, many are union employees, but those are also our employees, is making sure that we're accessible. I've had many people come up and just express appreciation for it. I will give you, as I mentioned at the end of this period, some of the learnings that I have seen, and there are learnings here, which I think are great adjustments the organization needs to make, but also there's a lot that the organization does really well that often gets forgotten. So I'll try and present to you some themes and a balanced approach. I'd like to get to the end of it to say, here's what the takeaways are for the organization, and most importantly, here's some of the things that we look to do about it. Some are already underway. I'll give you an example. At the Powell Street Garage, we had in our design to have fencing put around where our employees coming to work. Remember, the system's not running at that time of the early morning of the day, and so they would be exposed to general public access around the fence on the outside. We've now taken that fence, put it behind, so our employees will have protected parking coming to work. So that little change in itself was a significant issue for some of the employees that I met when I did the Powell Garage directly. So change made, on we go, thanks for the feedback, as one example of many that we'll put in place. One of the other things I will share with you, and I've noticed, is also there's a gap. Instead of not just waiting for me to go out there, others in the leadership team would go out. So I've asked our directors, they need to be doing this on a quarterly basis going forward, and I'll participate as best I can throughout the year on an ongoing basis. We have a lot of depots out there. of rail, bus, of different types of service. But I think these are examples I can share with you in case where we need to close the gap, we should do so. So all in all, I think it's been a very valuable exercise on the internal side. So again, there's still 3 more to go, but I think it's been very helpful. And it's not just having it from 9 to 5, it's getting out to the different terminals, and even showed up to one a couple weekends ago unannounced. And it's not on the schedule to say, okay, how are we doing? Let's take the temperature. And all in all, pretty good.
Good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Anyhow, I'll
Before you leave that, actually, I was just shocked when Jonathan said he was unaware of these meetings. It felt like he was not aware that you had talked to anybody at all. So would you mind just sending him a note when and where you've been, and
sure, absolutely,
the amount of number of people that you've talked to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely happy to do so. Yeah, in fact, as I mentioned, some of the union elected officials have actually participated.
I was just surprised.
Joe Ruffin, for example, was out at Ruby Yard with us one morning. He's terrific, and it was some great engagement, some great questions. Many hung around after the formal, not so much formal, but I'll call the fireside chat approach, where you want to encourage people to raise topics, and probably talk for 45 minutes after with Q&A, what's going on, what are the challenges, and it was terrific. Very helpful.
And I appreciate what you're doing, and I just, my expectation, at least when we put this together, was that you would not be able to talk to every individual employee in the organization, but over time, this would, with the works you're doing, you would engage with them, with either your direct reports or others in the management. So keep it up, and just make sure also Jonathan knows you're probably not going to have a chance to talk with every employee in the next.
Pretty challenging. But outside of this process, even in my past role, probably every week to 2 weeks, as Kelly and Tracy would know, who help coordinate my chaotic schedule, is I try and meet every week with retirees, with bus operators, the rail operators. I attend people's actually invited to their retirements. I'm going to some of those coming up. So this is beyond this. This is part of my upbringing, my culture. Have I connected with John directly? No. I'm going to where the action is, where the frontline staff, and where the customers are. So
perfect.
So I hope to continue that. Thank you. So next, from time to time, as you get a lot of very important information through PowerPoints and board reports, I'd like to introduce some of the great faces that come up to TriMet here, that are employees that help collapse from the board to the frontline employee. Today I've got a couple individuals that I think we'd like to put in front of you. Again, we use a lot of acronyms at TriMet. REM is one of them, and it refers to Rail Equipment Maintenance. These are part of the unsung hero team. And I'm going to ask if Dan Blair, our Director of excuse me, I can't even get that out, Dan. How am I doing? Rail Equipment Maintenance. This is the department that oversees the critically important job here at TriMet. This is about the rail vehicles, our light rail vehicles. They clean them, they maintain them, they repair a light rail, they respond to them when situations happen. These are unsung heroes in this organization. Proper vehicle maintenance contributes to our core value of safety. Yes, it helps improve reliability, ensures that we meet our customer satisfaction levels, and they get to choose where they come back, and we have to earn that right every single day. Dan's here to recognize a couple employees who consistently have gone above and beyond to keep operating at peak performance. So Dan, and by the way, I just also want to congratulate Dan for 25 great years of service coming up here at TriMet. So Dan, over to you, sir.
Good morning, Board President and Board members. Again, I'm Dan Blair, Director of Rail Equipment Maintenance. I'm here to introduce you to 2 REM employees whose accomplishments we'd like to bring to your attention. John Katana and Don Maywald. Unfortunately, John has some hours of service issues, so he's not able to attend this morning, but Don's here, and I'd like to bring him up as well.
All right, go.
Briefly, John is a journey worker mechanic with almost 10 years of service at TriMet. He is also an exemplary assistant supervisor who works at Ruby Junction. He is hardworking and dedicated to his work and a natural leader. He understands the department's priorities and manages the workforce's activities in a manner that ensures our vehicles are well maintained and our pullouts are consistently met. John is also a very talented mechanic and very willing to share his knowledge with his fellow mechanics and apprentices. John is an outstanding employee and a pleasure to work with. Don Maywald is a journey worker mechanic with 18 years of service at TriMet and 35 years experience as a railroad mechanic. He currently works wheel truing at the Almonica facility. The Almonica wheel truing machine recently underwent a nearly $2 million overhaul, and Don was instrumental in getting the machine back up and running after the refurbishment. During the overhaul, Don worked to build a good working relationship with a contractor, and this improved relationship helped facilitate needed repairs that allowed us to get the machine back up and running after bugs were identified after the contractor's work was completed. On 2 separate occasions, Don was able to troubleshoot the problems with the overhauled equipment and recommend repairs to the contractor that minimized downtime. Don is also building a training guide to help retrain his fellow mechanics on the newly overhauled machine. Don takes pride in his work and is always looking for ways to improve make his coworkers' jobs easier as well as more efficient. Don, if you'd like to address the board, please.
Yeah, just for really quick, I want to point out that the work done it's a team effort, and I couldn't have done what I did without the help of our facilities maintenance staff. Their knowledge and experience and resources are phenomenal. They're a good group, and I think they get underappreciated for what they achieve quite often. They're really a great group of guys. So.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for giving us that smooth ride on the light rail vehicles. We like that a lot.
I get it.
Thank you.
Are you taking apprentices yet? Soon?
We have a class that will be hired.
I've been asked by 2 different people.
Oh, this month, and then we'll
I got you right in front of me, so.
Yeah, this month, and then another one later this year, total of 20, so 8, and then 12 additional in the fall.
In the fall, okay, thank
We'll
you.
be graduating 3 classes in the next year, 1 in July, 1 in November, and another in March.
Okay, thanks.
So this is I'm sorry.
I'd just like to say to Don, thank you.
Yeah.
All your hard work.
Yep.
And to John also, please pass on our thanks to him. You guys are the bedrock of TriMet and help us to be successful every day.
All right.
And we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Good job. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask if Gene Cook could join me up here. Before we move on to the consent agenda, just take a moment to share a few words of a letter that I received on my desk a few weeks back. Again, this is all about bringing the faces and compressing the organization to what really goes on in the interim. It's not about me or others here. It's about our frontline service deliverers who take care of things when we aren't around. The letter I got was used words like above and beyond, admirable, appreciated, amazingly generous. Again, Gene Cook, one of our assistant managers of bus operations at Merlot. Maybe tell us a little bit about the operator involved in this incident and what he earned to do to earn this recognition. Thanks.
So myself and my counterpartner here.
Lyle Pereira?
Yeah.
Yes, welcome,
Why don't you
Lyle.
bring that microphone a little closer to you if you're going to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can just bring
Is
the
it this?
microphone, yeah, just bring it over towards you. There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm Jean Cook, Assistant Manager with TriMet, and we're, going to recognize one of our operators, and I kind of brought my counterpartner in because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it.
Good morning,
So,
President Warner, members of the board, and Doug. My name is Lyle Pereira. I am the transportation manager out of our Merlot facility, and I have the honor today to present to you one of our great Merlot drivers. David, will you join us up here? So this is David Inger. He's been an operator with TriMet now for 23 years. All of our operators do much more than just drive a bus. They are a frontline customer service team. They provide guidance and direction when needed, and they call first responders for assistance. On March 9th, when one of our passengers experienced a medical emergency, David did what any of our bus operators would do. He called for help, he kept riders safe, and he provided the highest level of customer service that he could. The bus had to be taken out of service so that the first responders from Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue could stabilize the patient before transporting. The passenger also uses a mobility device, and there wasn't enough room for it in the ambulance. To arrange for another ambulance or to wait for that ambulance to return to transport the scooter would have taken several hours and potentially additional costs to the patient. So with permission, David transferred his remaining passengers safely to another bus, and with his supervisor's approval, he delivered the scooter to the hospital for the patient. David's actions that day were best summed up by a letter that we received from the fire captain of the Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, Tualatin, excuse me. He called David's actions a show of outstanding service and compassion. So please join me today in thanking David for his resourceful thinking, his act of kindness, and his daily selfless service to our region. Thank you, David.
Sure. I'd like to mention two things. One is that I'd like to point out that TriMet Road Supervisor Jerry Zornato was instrumental in securing the ability for me to deliver the items to the hospital securely. So he coordinated with dispatch and St. Vincent Hospital security to make sure that the transfer of the patient's property, personal property, was delivered safely and securely. So I'd like to thank Jerry Zornato for taking care of that. And I'd also like to say that my whole entire career, 23 years and counting, I've always been very committed to customer service. And I just want to assure you that I will continue to be committed to customer service for the remainder of my career. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. These are just small photographs
I
of
got a
transactions that make a
Got a
difference.
question?
I have to ask, David.
Yes.
You just drive the bus up to St. Vincent's?
I just drove the bus up to St. Vincent's
Good.
Hospital.
All right. I was thinking up on the hill, maybe a bit different, but yeah. Good. Well, thank you
Well,
very
I can
much.
drive a bus up there too.
Don't go too far, David.
Touche, so.
I've been off route before.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, these are just small photographs that, to me, that it's important to bring to life the experiences how we touch people. It's only one strand at a time. We know in the relationship of equity with our customer, when you have a problem, every day you do something well, a penny goes into the jar of credibility. When you do something wrong, scoopfuls come out. But these are examples. There's many, many TriMet examples that from time to time I will share with you of what great people do in this organization. So thanks for your time on this today, and that would conclude my report.
Thank you very much. All right.
Yep.
You have another comment?
Well, yeah, I'd like to thank you, Doug, for bringing folks forward like this.
Yeah.
They are all amazing people, so thank you for the work you do and keeping things running. I'm just,
We gotta make that happen.
it makes me proud to be associated with this organization. Thank you.
Welcome.
Good. All right, well, moving on then, let's go to the consent agenda. And again, items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and may be approved by the board in one blanket motion. However, any board member may remove an item from the consent portion of the agenda for discussion or questions by requesting such action prior to the consideration of this portion of the agenda. There are 3 items on our consent agenda. First is approval of the board meetings for March 28th of this year. Second is a resolution directing the reading of all ordinances by title only. That's for our general manager's benefit again, and for ours. And then 3 is a resolution authorizing transfers of money within the current general fund budget year. So with that, is there any items that the board would like to have removed from the consent agenda for consideration? Seeing then none, and then is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Have a motion, have a second? Any further discussion? Seeing none? All those then in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. All right, well, let's move on to our two resolutions we have. The first resolution is Resolution 18-04-34, which is authorizing a modification of a contract for the Powell Lift relocation project.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. This resolution requests the board to authorize the general manager to execute a modification to the contract with the Mario Design for the Powell Lift relocation project specifically. As you well know, our bus garages are at capacity, yet we're preparing to expand service and to fully serve our riders. With this expansion, we're adding more buses to the fleet. With the new buses comes the need for additional space and support. To meet some of that need, we're expanding TriMet's Powell Garage facility, but to achieve this, we determined we first needed to relocate Powell Lift paratransit operation from the Powell Garage to the nearby Powell Park and Ride. The need for lift service is also growing, and the relocation of lift will allow for the storage of more lift vehicles. In April of 2016, the board approved an $800,000 contract for Mario for architectural and engineering work on the lift project. Then, in March of 17, as the scope of the project's design increased, the contract was increased to $925,000. The project is now in the construction phase, and the need for design services has grown once again due to the unforeseen circumstances for things just like we talked about earlier, like permit delays, jurisdictional requirements, and some site conditions unknown. With the 10% overage allowance that has now been exhausted, the board is now being asked to increase the contract to not to exceed the amount to $1,082,500. The project is included in the FY 17 and 18 general fund budget, and a decision to not authorize a modification would likely result in increased project costs and likely extend the timeline now that things are underway. Mario is a certified disadvantaged business enterprise, a minority business enterprise in the state of Oregon, and it's currently achieving about 43% WSB participation. Your approval is recommended.
All right. Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Questions by the board? Very straightforward. Seeing no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve resolution?
So moved.
All right. Is there a second? I have a second. Any further discussion? All right, then I'll call for the vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 18-04-34, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Let's go on to our final resolution, which is Resolution 18-04-35, which is authorizing the contract modification for the e-fare technical assistance services.
Okay, great, thank you. The purpose of this item is to request that the board authorize the general manager to execute the contract modification for CH2M Hill, which is also AKA Jacobs now. There's been an acquisition, but for contract purposes referred to as CH2M Hill, for technical assistance services for the e-fare project, also better known as our Hop Fast Pass. TriMet first entered into a two-part contract with CH2M Hill for this project back in 2012. Part one was for the development of the Hop Fast Pass system, and part two was for the implementation of the system. As you know, we have successfully launched HOP last July. The project was on time and under its projected budget. Now the scope of the project is evolving. There are multiple integrations underway to improve efficiency and expand partnership opportunities. Just last week, we launched a virtual HOP card that's available in Google Pay, the world's first. Staff is now requesting additional funding with CH2M Hill in an amount not to exceed $445,000, as well as a contract extension through March of 2020 to conduct this work. The additional funds will allow for consistent technical assistance services to support TriMet and its expanded rollout of the Hop Fast Pass. We believe this is very much a revolutionary product with near limitless possibilities. Your recommendation is before you.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Any questions on this resolution?
I will be recusing myself.
Okay. Okay. That's right. That did that before.
Yeah. I forget the last name of the young man, Chris
Tucker.
And I know he left. Did he go over to CH2M?
No, Chris Tucker is,
If you can tell me, I don't
he's
know.
gone into another small partnership
Okay.
firm,
All right.
which in some cases subs underneath a number of different firms.
Yeah. I just,
Yeah.
I count on him to answer the questions that I don't know.
Well, Ryan, who was here earlier this morning for the TSC,
Oh, see?
she is the new and improved Chris Tucker.
Okay, all right, next time. Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes.
Doug, I'm just kind of curious, on the last page of the staff report, it lists the integration efforts. So slow-income fare, virtual cars, Lyft paratransit, ticket vending machines. It also includes bike lockers. I'm not familiar with how that would need to be integrated.
Yeah, part of this is trying to integrate our network beyond just transit, but those who use transit as well. So yes, bike lockers would have the capability to use the hop card for those, in some cases, where you rent bike lockers down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Nope. See no other questions, then is there a motion to approve Resolution 18-04-35?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Slow, that's the first time, yeah. All right, good. Any further questions? All right, then. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 18-04-35, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? One. All right. That was Director Simmons noting her abstention. All right, so the motion is approved with one abstention. All right, well, that concludes our resolutions for the day. Now we're going to move on to ordinance number 350, which is our second reading and potential adoption. So we will, I'll ask TriMet General Manager Shelley Devine for a second reading of this ordinance by title only.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. Ordinance 350 of the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, adopting service changes, updating designations, and amending TriMet Code Chapter 22. This is the second reading, as you pointed out.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. General Manager.
Thank you. Ordinance 350 adopts service changes, specifically and update route destinations for fiscal year 2019. This is the second reading, as you've just discussed. We did go through an extensive list at the last board meeting, but I'd like to touch on a few highlights specifically for you here today. This fall, we're looking at an ambitious expansion of our service, which includes, as you heard earlier, the reintroduction of 24-hour service for the first time in more than 30 years. We would start in September with lines 20 and 57. We'd also plan to add a new bus line that will bridge the gap between the MAX Red Line service and PDX in the airport. We'll make additional improvements, increasing frequency and service hours on other lines to serve our customers better and when they need us on their terms. So lots more to come. In March, we're looking at additional service improvements, including a highly anticipated extension of line 24 across the Fremont Bridge. In fact, you heard about the testimony at the last board meeting, support for that, and through the Northwest Portland to the Goose Hollow MAX station to help people access jobs on the west side. The proposed service changes are the result of numerous conversations and meetings, as well as outreach with our jurisdictional partners, businesses, riders, and community stakeholders. That would conclude my comments, and your approval is recommended.
All right, thank you. This is a great ordinance. Are there questions? Are there questions or other comments?
Just on the handout, it's September 18th. Is that when the OHSU bus changes are going to happen?
Yes.
I was in a fair with them the other night. I got hit up pretty good.
Oh, did you? Okay.
They want it, right?
Oh, they want it. They're very excited.
Yeah, I hope
they want it right now.
They want it, yeah. So,
correct.
Good.
Other questions or comments by the board? Well, you, the board, we've seen and heard about the outreach that's been done in the community on the proposed changes. You've heard and seen some of the reactions to these changes. Most all of them very supportive, especially last month's public hearing. And the board was briefed on the equity analysis at its March meeting, where the board indicated that it approved and felt good about its findings. So we're at this point now, are we ready to offer a motion to approve ordinance 350?
So move.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a second? Good. Any further discussion about this? Please.
I guess I just want to make one more comment, which is these service expansions and the most recent ones that took place earlier this year have all occurred without a fare increase. And I think that's really important for the public to know, that we are providing really top quality service and keeping it very affordable.
Thank you very much. Other comments? That really does sum it up, and I'm looking for more of these in the future as we move forward with the implementation of House Bill 2017. Yes.
How are these going to be broadcast or communicated?
This is actually an interesting question you asked. It's a great question. Something that I've seen in my new role is I think it's important. We plan to take out some newspaper ads. We need to advertise this. We have a very strong following through social media and such, but I do think we need to be a bit loud and proud. And so this is a bit of a tactical change to overlay on top of our existing base to really share, and I'll leave it to the experts in marketing, whether it be community-based papers, Oregonian, or what combination of, but I think you don't get, these type of expansions don't occur every day, so I think we need to push our own envelope a little bit, and our team's
There's
been
a
asked.
whole lot of them. It isn't onesie twosies.
Yep.
So
Good.
Good comment. All right. Well, is the board ready for a vote? All right.
Thank you, Mr.
General
Board President.
Counsel?
Thank you, Mr. Board President. I'll start with Director Bethel,
Yes.
Director Esmond,
Yes.
Director Simmons,
Yes.
Director Warner,
Yes.
Director Stovall,
Yes.
Director Bauman,
Yes.
Director Prosser.
Yes.
Ordinance 350, the motion to adopt ordinance 350 passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate that. All right. So that's it for what's on our business meeting. Is there anything else that staff or the board would like brought before this morning?
No, not at this time.
All right, then with that, I'm going to adjourn our business meeting. We have two briefing items. Does the board need maybe a 5-minute break before we start? Okay, good. All right. Let's do that. All right, ready to go?
We are ready to go.
Please proceed.
Okay.
President Warner, members of the board, Bernie Bottomley, again, along with a little feedback. No? Closer. Okay, closer rather than farther away. Okay. We're here to present on TriMet's annual Attitude and Awareness Survey. This is a survey that TriMet does every year. Pretty significant sized sample around the region of both our riders and non-riders. And so we have been doing this for many, many years. And I'd like to present Michelle Neese, who is the Vice President of Research for DHM, who has been our contractor on this project for many years. Michelle.
Great, thank you, Bernie, and thank you all for having me here today. DHM really appreciates the opportunity to work on this project. Transit is important to the region, and it's one of the topics that's of high interest to DHM. Okay, so as Bernie said, this is your annual Attitude and Awareness Survey. You do it every year to sort of track regional approval of the agency's performance overall, ridership, awareness of projects, and then there's usually a rotation in and out of specific questions that are of interest topically at the moment. I'll try to be clear as we walk through on paper what slide I'm on. We're still just right at the intro here. Just to kind of remind you of the methodology, it's remained the same overall. We telephone 800 residents around the region and talk to them. It's about a 20-minute conversation, so it's pretty in-depth, and we're asking a lot of people to talk to us. It's conducted in the fall, specifically November 8th through 14th. And we do a couple different steps up front and on the back end to make sure that the opinions we gather represent our region. So we use quotas and we use weighting around county, age, gender, and ethnicity. So the numbers you see today represent this resident's population as a whole. Okay. Also, I'll just note that in that 20 minutes, we ask a lot of questions. I'm not going to be able to get through it all today, so I'm just going to share with you some select highlights.
Before you start, on your selection of the population,
Mm-hmm.
did you ever think about separating people who've lived here for 20 years or people who versus people who've been here for 3 years?
That's
or 40.
I don't believe that's a banner point we've run.
Okay.
So far,
Just
that's certainly a question we could look at including and making sure that we're doing those analyses in the future.
Thanks.
Okay. One of the first questions we ask is just a right track, wrong direction question to gauge general mood. And as you can see this year, the residents are sort of divided. 45% think we're on the right track and 42% think we're on the wrong track. Certain groups are more optimistic than others. So Multnomah County residents, Washington County residents are a bit more optimistic. Younger people below 55 are more optimistic. Really interesting to me this year is your core riders are very optimistic. They're one of the most optimistic. 61%
We knew that.
of frequent and regular riders think it's on the right track. So obviously we can't say there's any causal relationship there, but it does suggest that maybe a riding TriMet is good for you.
And is this, when we say region, this is across the entire region, not just TriMet specific?
Just TriMet. Just
Oh, this is just TriMet.
The TriMet service area in the 3 counties.
But this is,
So it wouldn't include Banks or Sandy.
but this is related to kind of the overall direction of the entire region, not
Not
TriMet
just
specific direction.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we are showing you the overall approval ratings for TriMet in general in green, Max in blue, and Bus in yellow. And as you can see, in the general population, about 7 in 10 approve of TriMet's overall job performance. There's also should just be noted that approval among riders is substantially higher. So overall, over 8 in 10 riders approve of TriMet's performance, and 91%, 9 in 10, approved of TriMet's performance when it comes to bus operations. So certainly your customers.
Yeah, I always like to point out two things with this. One is that this level of approval for a government entity is incredibly high. You find this in very few places, with very few other agencies at this level. And the other is that there is this differential between sort of the general public and the riders. The riders typically have a very high approval rating, even above these numbers. And what this reflects in a large sense is what the media is covering around TriMet, because that's what the general public generally understands about how the agency is doing.
I would say from a statistical sense, when I look at the green line from 2014 to 2017, I know it looks like it's going up and down, but if you were to smooth that out, it would be basically a stable performance evaluation. One of the key things we like to look at every year is how many of our residents are using TriMet. And once again, you have a really strong customer base. 76% of area residents used TriMet in the last year, up slightly from the year before. Nonetheless, there was also a little bit of a drop in the proportion of riders who are on TriMet at least a couple times a month. And so overall, although the number of riders may have gone up, the core riders who make up more of the trips were slightly lower than before.
Excuse me, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
At what is the point of statistical
validity?
Say,
Margin of error.
yeah, the margin of error.
The margin of error overall is 3.5 points.
Okay, well, and what I'm wondering is, you know, if this just caught my eye, where we go on occasional riders, it went from 39% to 35%. Is that a statistical significant difference, or?
I would say technically it's not quite statistically significant. It's right on the margins.
Okay. So about a 4 to 5% difference is where you get into that.
Right, because you have the margin of error around both numbers, right? So that's where it gets a little bit fuzzy.
Okay.
So, but certainly it's you continue to watch it, and I know that TriMet is aware of the national trends that also have decreased ridership across the country, and also just overall another trend in the country right now is that people are taking fewer rides of any kind in their car or transit. So we're just a little bit more sedentary than maybe we should be.
Well, and I think to go back to the sort of the ridership conversation that you were having earlier, one of the things that we found in the ridership analysis was that the commute trips are pretty steady. So people that are traveling every day to downtown, for example, tend to continue to ride transit on a regular basis because driving and parking downtown are expensive, and taking Lyft or Uber for that kind of trip every single day gets to be expensive. Where you see softening is on the weekends and evenings, the off-peak trips. So you're taking, one trip a week or one trip every couple of weeks to go out to dinner in the evening, to go out to a show. That trip is more likely today to be a Lyft or Uber trip than it was historically. And then finally, I think part of the dynamic is a little bit of a success story, which is that we've had a strategy over the last 30 to 40 years, particularly in Portland, but around the region, to create walkable neighborhoods. And we've been incredibly successful in the last 10 years in those neighborhoods developing. And so some of the trips that used to be transit trips or car trips are now pedestrian trips, and they just don't show up on the radar.
Here I'm showing you the reliability ratings of the general population for both bus and MAX. And overall, I think the story here is that people continue to see bus and MAX as reliable. It's fairly stable. I would note that there has been an uptick, again, a little bit there in the yellow line for bus, and that may be reflecting people noticing some of the better performance and on-time arrivals of the buses in particular. And MAX in general is very high, in part because of the differential in service there. So last year and this year, we started asking this question about how many residents use ride-hailing services. As Bernie noted, people are choosing to use other services in our region. Here overall, I still say, 6 in 10 never use ride-hailing services. About 3 in 10, 30% use them less than once a month. What's also true this year, as was true before last year, is that TriMet riders look to be more open to using alternatives to driving. They're more likely to use transit and ride-hailing and walk and bike. So they will use all of those options. Specifically, we did ask this year about whether they're using ride-hailing to get to or from transit. 9% of riders say they do that at least sometimes. And about a quarter of your riders say they use ride-hailing services instead of transit sometimes. We also probe people a little bit. We asked them to think about whether they're riding TriMet more or less than they did last year, and then we asked them why. So around a quarter of riders or people say they're riding less now than they did last year. And the most common reason is lifestyle changes that are really beyond TriMet's control. And we did probe even further this year and try to get them to move further. So if they said, well, my work changed, we'll say, oh, well, what about your new work makes transit not the option you turn to now, right? Nevertheless, even with probing, you still get that a big reason people don't ride anymore is because they just don't need transit in their lives anymore. They've retired, or they're just taking fewer trips, and that could be due to reasons they chose not to share with us, whether that's economic or health. But that's the number one reason for riding less. Certainly just, one thing that might be more addressable is the safety issues. That is the second reason there. When it comes to reasons to ride more, again, it's really around liking the service that TriMet offers, finding it convenient. And so those are important features that attract customers to TriMet. As we ask every year, we ask about safe operations of both bus and MAX. Here again, you see fairly stable ratings in bus in yellow, 76% this year approve of the safe operation of buses. I will note that as we normally do find, that number was higher among riders, 81% of riders approve. MAX, you do see that slight dip this year, probably reflecting some of the news events over the past year. Overall, the 5% drop, I think, also shows that you had sort of a buffer of goodwill, however, in that area. And I will note that 78% of riders approve of safe MAX operation. This year, there were a few new questions added around those issues of safety and security to kind of probe a little bit further. So one of the questions was around whether there's the presence of security personnel on TriMet is enough or not enough. Half of our population thinks it's not enough on TriMet, and among riders, it is 53%. So around the same. And around 20% don't know, and that's probably, again, your non-riders are just not sure. We also asked a question about whether people believe TriMet treats minority and non-minority populations the same when it comes to rules and fare enforcement. In this question, about 10% of residents had concerns that minority populations might be treated inequitably, and about 50% feel that they probably are treated similarly. And that number was the same for people of color and non-minority residents. I'll point out also that about 2 in 10 were unsure, and that number was slightly higher among non-minority residents. So finally, I just wanted to highlight some awareness of the Hot Fat program. As you guys know, that rolled out last summer, I believe. And so over the past year then, there's been a considerable increase in awareness. 45% of everyone in the region is aware of Hot Fast Pass. Importantly, 72% of your frequent regular riders were aware of that program. And so clearly the customers are getting the message that this is an option for them. And of those who are aware of the program, about half know that the fare capping features and how that works. So again, fairly good communication with your riders. So to sum up, overall, I would say the sense is that Portland's view TriMet favorably, and they appreciate the service you have to offer. And that's definitely a testament to the level of service provided by staff and service deliverers. So I certainly hope that those results are shared with them.
Questions, observations, opinions? Of course.
I know you're surprised.
What's new, right?
You're like, wow, really, Travis? So, in reference to the questions that I asked earlier about ridership, as I look at this information, it kind of confirms kind of some of the thoughts that, I was looking at earlier, in that we've made significant improvements in key areas, but yet it's not necessarily represented, out in the community, specifically in the area of the improvements of on-time performance. I mean, we've made some huge leaps in on-time performance, but the perception in the public is that our on-time performance is actually down. So that's kind of a negative correlation between improvement, but yet the overall public perception. And I think this information, Bernie, you've already been working with this information. I think that's why you had such great insight when you started off by saying, ultimately, some of what we see and what we hear back from our stakeholders and riders is that what they hear and see sometimes, specifically the ones who aren't riders, comes from the overall, not to pick on the media specifically, but it comes from what gets reported, and sometimes the sensationalization of some of those things that are rare in our experience and operations of our system. And so I think there's some of that goes on, in that some of those things that are that are negative and those rare things that get sensationalized are some of what the public then sees and then extrapolates from that this happens all throughout the system. So I think overall, this is a positive report, and similar to what you just referenced in regards to being a government agency, but yet having that high approval rating is something that's helpful and impressive for the work that we do, and a true testament, similar to some of the folks that were even here this morning getting honored for the great jobs that they do out there. as I kind of wrap up my comment and statement, I'll ask the question, and this is kind of for both of you. As a board member, as we look at all the individual parts of kind of what we see here, what's our takeaway as board members of this agency as we look forward to making decisions and making policy decisions that positively impact what we're up to based on this information? What's kind of that synopsis or summary from a board member perspective that then we can now take and utilize as we move forward with our decision making? I know I'm asking you to jump into the role that we have here, but it's pushing you a little further to say, okay, you're closer to this information. I appreciate the additional comments that you've made that aren't necessarily on here. You like the ones where you say, well, from your ridership, this is kind of what they believe and what their perspective is. And lastly, of course, we know we've got work to do around the ideas of kind of what we do and what the public perspective is in the treatment of minorities compared to non-minorities. And it was interesting that it looked like, it appeared with the subtext or the subnote, that even non-minorities feel like that there's a disparity in the treatment. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what it looked like the information said, with that side note over on the side where it says both minorities and non-minority agree at 51%. So I asked you a lot of stuff there.
All right, so just to do that last question first, it's, in this case, half of both minorities and non-minority groups agree that TriMet treats them similarly, so that they're receiving the same treatment from TriMet when it comes to rules.
That's what I meant to say.
Yes. And then the disagree was actually similar. It's not shown here, but 10% of non-minority people think, I don't agree with that. And 12% of people of color did not agree. So again, those are very similar numbers. Where certainly people of color are the ones who have the more realistic perception, perhaps, or living
Experience.
that experience
Right.
to be able to address that question.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for correcting. Yeah, that's what I meant, because
Okay.
if 51% of our population believe that, we would really have a problem.
Yes, that's a very different landscape.
Correct.
I just wanted to touch on the on-time performance issue, because that is one that we've worked to look at in a number of different ways to try to analyze. When we did the ridership analysis, we tried different time lags, because maybe somebody doesn't stop riding the first time the bus is not on time, but the third or fourth time, maybe they start to say, okay, I can't rely on the system. And it's really hard to know what the lag is there. But I think, just sort of as a thought experiment, you can imagine that individuals will notice off-time performance more readily than they will on-time performance. So the first time the bus is late, you notice it. The first time the bus is on time, you probably don't notice it. And the second time and the third time, it takes a long time to build that confidence that, oh, okay, I can always rely on the bus being here at this time. So I think there is a lesson to be learned in that once you've lost people's confidence in your on-time performance, it's much more difficult to build it back than to lose it. Sort of standard customer service mantra that it's much easier to keep the customer you have than to go out and find a new customer.
I just might add, if I may, to this. I think if we just go to ourselves as consumers in other products that we purchase, that if we were, say, the photograph a couple of years ago of 75%, let's say 1 in 4 things didn't work. So if you go to a retail store and you scan your product item and 1 in 4 SKUs got the wrong price, you're probably not going to shop there if you have choices long term. If you buy a car that only starts 3 out of 4 times, you're probably not going to buy that car again. So if we really think from the customer's lens and to really get to what Bernie said, is this higher level that when it becomes absent, boy, does it stand out. If it's a bit of reverse boiling the frog, that we've eroded over years, but if we get this back up, and people now get to make a choice on our best game. And also connections get really important here, not just when you get on and was the bus late with no connections. It's if you transfer from one mode to another, bus to bus, rail to rail, or any combinations. And boy, if you miss that, and you've got, pretending what the frequency of service is, if it's 5 minutes, you got a little tolerance, 15, start to get to an hour service particularly, that is structural and significant, that I think we place ourselves potentially in jeopardy of losing the trust of that customer the further the gap that we provide service in. So I think this is where the Ubers and Lyfts and others, people will pursue alternatives, particularly if it's raining or they've missed appointments, sometimes self-inflicted from our customer. I think we have to make sure that we've done our part to not allow that contract, if you will, to be in jeopardy.
Actually, can I follow up on just that specific component? Because ultimately, I agree with you. And the issue that I'm trying to work my mind through is this idea that if we go back a couple of years, we're at 75% reliability. Now we're at a significantly higher reliability, but the perception in the community, at least Max has come down a bit. The bus has improved, so that's positive. But Max is one of the areas where we've increased reliability as far as on-time service significantly, but yet the perception in the community has decreased that it's reliable. And there's two things that I really want to point out here. One of them is, as we look at some of the structural changes, in the system, i.e. the ride-sharing pieces of this and ride-hailing pieces of it, they weren't baked in. A few years back when we were looking at ridership and we were looking at what our goals were for ridership. And so that's something that's new, and there's other things that are new. Then we also have this idea of what I was referencing earlier, as we peak in our ridership, which, feels like we did a couple of years back, it's, the opportunity that someone's going to be dissatisfied with our service increases, because we're now at our peak performance. And as soon as that happens, we're now on the fringes or on the tail ends of potential riders. And when you've got your core riders, they're going to be willing to accept, lots of different things as they go about their day because they're a core rider. But on the fringes, they're not going to be willing to. And it felt like we made it all the way out to the fringes a few years back, and now we've come back into our core ridership, because we reached the points where we were not reliable on time sometimes. All of those things that you get to when you start to get to those, when you get to the fringe. The fringe rider, the very occasional rider, they have a negative experience. They're like, it didn't work for me, and they move to something else. And so I say all this just as a board member to fully comprehend and understand what are we going to hold ourselves accountable to as an agency. Is it some significant increase in our ridership, or is it something where we're holding ourselves to an accountability that's a little bit more stable? Because what may require a significant investment to see a massive, or I shouldn't say it that way. It may require a significant investment to see a very marginal increase in our ridership if that's what we purport that we're going to try and accomplish. And so I've got some concerns about really if increased ridership should be the component that we hang out as our banner, what we try to accomplish based on this information that we're receiving. And I'm a little concerned that it's going to take an outsized and oversized investment to achieve a very minor, increase or improvement in our ridership. And I don't think the return on investment as a community, as a region, is going to be there based on the compilation of all the information and data that we've received. I would say over the last year to year and a half, and all the follow-up things that we've done. I just got major concerns about the return on that overall investment for our entire region and community, based on all of this. And it just continues, I think, at least in my opinion, to support, this idea that I just don't know if an overall increase in ridership should be the target that we hang out there.
Well, I think you have hit on some interesting points. And just an additional data point to think about is that as we roll out the service that comes into play with House Bill 2017, a lot of the focus is on that new service is going to be low-income communities, which will push service to East Portland. the focus will be on East Portland. The ridership density of any hour of service that we put in East Portland is going to be lower than if we took that same hour and put it on interdivision, right? But you have this equity question, which is, should your sole benchmark for performance be increased ridership? That drives a certain set of investments, which is basically putting more service on already frequent routes. So giving people who have good service better service. On the other hand, if the equity lens is, the one that you're looking through, then you're trying to put more hours out in places that have very little service or no service. And the incremental additional ridership you get for that investment is going to be lower, just because the population densities and the origins and destinations are less dense. And transit it doesn't perform as well in those environments as it does in the most dense locations. So I think you raise a really good point about, and as a utility, we have multiple missions. We have the efficiency mission, but we also have the coverage and social reach mission. And so trying to balance those is important.
Something I wanted to comment on, and it has to do with the change in reliability of our schedule, is that it's a common fact that when trust is broken, it's not that it can't be regained, but it's going to take a significant effort to regain it. And I maintain as a board and as an agency, and Doug has heard me say this before, is that we need to actually develop a marketing strategy that talks about our successes and doesn't just sort of expect people to know it. I just don't think that we take advantage of a whole series of things that if people see it and hear it or read it, it all of a sudden, particularly even non-riders, non-riders will hear a friend who's groveling about the bus was delayed.
Yes.
And so, I know we haven't been an agency that has marketed our successes, and I think we need to change that.
Good point. And we, to be completely honest with you, we've been a little reticent to do some advertising because we have known that the service wasn't on time. So we have a totally different story to tell now than we did a year ago.
Just from my inside view as a board member of this agency, there's so much that the public has no idea about that I think would change the numbers from your survey in terms of to the positive. If we marketed ourselves in terms of our successes.
Good. A couple more. I'm going to have to leave, folks. I apologize.
Okay.
So I'm going to leave it in your able hands to tell when to cut off. You guys can fight over who's next. Go ahead.
You're in there too. Okay.
Well, you stole my thunder, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
See you, Bruce. I just think, not to be an armchair quarterback, but the fact that we haven't increased the fare in 6 years.
I think it's fabulous.
What utility can say that?
Not many.
In this area, at least. So we've done that. We've increased the service to move more people, especially some of these are for regular riders, some are going to jobs, especially up on Pill Hill. I think we should blow it up a little bit. I know we all get pieces of mail from the city or the county. This is what we've done for you this year, but we don't sell ourselves, and we got a lot to sell. And how you guys want to do that, but especially when we just had the tax thing, the business tax was okay, the raise, and now's a good time to put it out in the public, not go to the chambers or the PBAs or the WEAs. That's one thing, but just broadcast ourselves.
For example, here's a perfect example, because I was out there, the opening line, the new line 42. Okay. In my remarks, there was nothing in there that said how we were doing this in March. And in the newspaper, it was that we've got these new lines, but it never talked about the fact that we were doing this at the same time that people were actually paying the increased tax as a means of giving them some expanded service because of that, due to House Bill 2017. And it seemed to me like, not just as a board member, but as a community. And so I added that to my comments because otherwise people are going, well, why are you doing this now? And don't you normally institute changes in September? And I felt that this would have been a great media thing to say, we're doing this ahead of us even receiving the money from you, but because it's when you're starting to pay it as an acknowledgement of giving you something for that cost. I mean, that's a perfect media thing to say, oh, that was a wonderful thing that we did.
Sure. Yeah, good point.
Greg.
What all this discussion to me revolves around is the fact that perception is reality. And that's really difficult to address because we can be doing the best job in the world, but if people don't know it, they'll still perceive it as a poor job. What kind of leads to a question, because I'm thinking about, okay, well, how do we change that perception? Clearly being more proactive about telling our story is a key part of that, but when you did the survey, did you drill down on any of these questions? So, like, for example, the approval of the job TriMet is doing overall. And specifically what I'm wondering for the non-writers, did we have a series of questions? Well, why is that? Why do you see it as not as good? And then the other question I'm wondering about is if we could find out information on, while we're talking to these people, what would it take for you to start writing? What needs to change? At this point, I don't know, and I don't know how we find that out.
Right, so this year we didn't probe those questions. That's something we did last year. I'd have to go back to see what they said at that point, and we can do that for you for sure. In general, it's hard to make one survey do everything. And I certainly think that there's opportunities to go out and ask some of those questions. I'd also want to be careful about spending TriMet's funds and have a really focused goal for some of that work to address it.
And if you go to slide 7, we do ask questions like this, either in the ANA survey or in onboard surveys. So we do probe these questions about what would make you ride more, why are you riding less, and these are not these are typical answers. So if it was closer, more convenient, went where I wanted to go, those kinds of answers are typically far and away the driver for folks to say, I would ride more if you did those things, much more so than things like cleanliness or even security tends to not be as high on that list, although I think the general manager made a good point that our understanding of that dynamic is maybe not as deep as it could be, and there's probably folks who say that it doesn't affect them, that it really does affect them because they just don't want to answer the question that way. But typically it's convenience, location of the stop, going where I want to go. And I think, this demographic shift that we've seen and the change in origin and destinations, that where downtown is not the only place that you go anymore. That's the challenge that sort of shows up there, that it used to be that if you had a hub and spoke system, you covered, most of your customer base. Now it's going to take, a different kind of system, and that's why you see us adding those north-south routes to try to make those linkages more convenient and quicker for folks.
I was just going to add, I think the length of time of the overall trip is another important factor. And so one of the top concerns for people in the region right now is traffic congestion. And even on a bus, if you're stuck in traffic and your trip takes a really long time, the timetables may have accurately forecasted the time, but it's a difficult sell if it's going to take me an hour to get somewhere.
Just a couple comments just to the broader conversation. Firstly, to the feedback, I think Director Prosser asked a great question. Experts here will tell me otherwise, I'm sure, after. But I'm a big believer in customer focus groups, and I think there'd be very helpful for us to bring in some qualified individuals who left our system to get to these questions and really push it rather than the Q&A over a phone or other one. When you get them live in the one-way mirrors, for those who've had the experience, you get to, in my mind, tease out some of the other elements in a conversation that sometimes the clock's running on these, the questions themselves. So I find for some sub work, I think that might be a helpful tool in our toolbox to really get to some of the underpinning issues here around where there might be opportunities, where if we've made mistakes, we need to understand that. Where there's opportunities, I think we understand that. So I think management needs to push this more, in my opinion. The second point, and unrelated, I'd make is to the ridership, I'd be cautious in throwing up the white flag right now. Sometimes markets make adjustments, and sometimes we have some long-term investments here that through HB 2017, some new ways to drive riderships, to create new travel patterns, increase frequencies, go after 24-hour service, overlay smart technology that makes it easier as barriers to entry on the system. If we look at the backdrop, this region is growing by about 400,000 people here over the next 30 years. So, 20, excuse me, yes. So that's a significant, that's a little city every year coming to our system. For me, the question is, what's our market share going to be related to some of those growth and patterns, as opposed to, I believe our ridership will grow a bit of, I call it Charlie Brown's t-shirt, maybe up and down over time, but I think the trajectory still is positive as we invest in shaping the system and serving it. Yes, we're not as effective in our responsibility as an agency that Bernie talked about when you use public transportation to shape an area that maybe hasn't fully built out yet. So those aren't always fully as productive as you want. But I think there's tremendous opportunity in developing new relationships, including not just is it Uber or Lyft or ourselves. I think if we take a broad lens of total mobility for the customer, end-to-end service, that TriMet has a very important role, that we will help our customers with that ultimate goal of getting to where they want to go on their terms. More frequency. Can you get from the hour service to the half-hour service? These open up avenues that they get to choose, to 15-minute service. One of the things I would like to poke at longer term is some of our planning is when you put new lines in, it's an hour service is not frequent. Is that really winning? It's a start, but maybe we need to amp it up, saying, we're going to come in with 30, maybe 30-minute service as opposed to the minimum of an hour. But as we work with our municipal partners, we need you in the partnership municipality to help us drive land use and the conditions that make us successful, including travel times. The region does not talk about reducing travel times for our customer, in my mind, enough. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. We could be on time, but if we're an hour and a half, we've probably lost the customer for those unless they really need it. So I think there's a package of things that, with the backdrop of the 400,000 people coming, that our net ridership will grow over time, but there are some market settlements going on here. We need to be better at that. So I would just leave it there.
All right. I think we're probably ready to move along. Thank you. We greatly appreciate the annual review and survey information as we continue to kind of look at everything that we need to do as a board and as an agency as we move forward, being a resource for this community and this region to our stakeholders, our riders, and everything in between to ensure that we're delivering. So again, thank you, Michelle and Bernie. Greatly appreciate that information. I believe we've got the update on the business plan.
Correct. I'm going to call up Ellen Lato if I can. And so this is the latest update that Ellen will walk you through. We'll move through the slides fairly quickly. I'm just sensitive to time and any questions the board members may have. As you know, we developed the business plan last year and to align our efforts across the agency to also articulate some forward-looking KPIs. Performance indicators. Many transit agencies have business plans, but very, very few actually put performance metrics to the degree possible with them. We've really worked hard to do that. There's still more work to be done, but we are very much underway. We've spent a lot of last year with extensive communication. I would like to thank Director Prosser, Director Simmons for their advice and help. The key check-in points as their sage advice is in the integration of this. So this is the next update. Al, I'll turn it over to you and walk us through.
Great, thank you, Doug. Members of the board, you have in front of you a draft of the business plan for fiscal years 2019 through 2023. As Doug mentioned, the first TriMet business plan we released last year, and we've put a lot of work and effort into both the business plan itself, but also the key strategic actions, the actual actions to make progress on those key performance. On the measures and targets. And this is our first chance to then reflect on how we did, and that's what this plan is all about. Just as a quick reminder, the strategy map that sets our overall direction for success remains the same. We put a lot of work into identifying those goals, and they are still very much relevant and guide the overall structure. Those 12 goals, each one has at least one, if not more, objectives that help flesh that out to really understand what that means. And each one of those has at least one key strategic action. One of the big reasons for having a business plan is, now with something like 3,000 employees, we can't all get in a room and all get on the same page really easily. So you've got to have this kind of guiding strategic look at what we're doing and consistent reporting and consistent return to this to really understand, are we heading in the right direction? Are we all coordinated? And that's all about alignment. The key thing that we do every day is that we, on an average weekday, over 300,000 times, somebody steps on a bus or a max light rail to get to somewhere that's really important to them. Our operators, like David, who you met earlier today, are doing their best to provide good customer service. And then it takes a whole bunch of people aligned behind those operators, making sure that the bus is there, that it's in good shape, that it's clean, that we're running on time, that all of these things are happening so that we can provide that excellent customer service. What I want to do is basically, you have the plan in front of you, and there's a lot of detail in there, obviously, but I want to give you a few highlights of some of the progress. You'll note that we did this very simple sort of up green arrow means we're on target. A yellow square means that we're not quite hitting that target, but we're close. A red down arrow means we're off target, and we really need to pay attention to that and see what else we can do about it. I've done a number of presentations throughout the agency with folks in all different divisions and departments. One of the things I emphasize, and something that is very important to be successful in this kind of approach, is to create and model that learning environment. So don't just pay attention to your successes. Obviously pay attention to those and celebrate them, but also pay attention to what's not working and learn from those. And so I encourage that every time I do a presentation or have a conversation. So we talked a little bit about some of this, but just a snapshot here, you can see for bus on-time performance, the red is our target and the blue is our actual month-to-month experience. And you can see that significant uptick. One thing I will note is the survey that you just heard about was conducted in November of 2017. And so the positives that we've seen for the past 5 months weren't included in there. And it takes time, as was said, to earn back that trust. Same on the max, very definite uptick in the trend overall, and that continues. That takes a lot of work from a lot of different people, and so we will continue to focus on that. At the same time, happy to say that our safety statistics are generally trending in the right direction as well, which is what we really want to see. We don't want to compromise one for the other. We want both on-time performance and safety to be heading in the right direction, and that's what the numbers are telling us. I've picked just a couple of other measures to note. One is about equitable distribution, where we look at things like how we provide service, how we distribute our vehicles, how we provide bus stop amenities, things like that. And the vast majority of those measures are all headed in the right direction. We're all seeing that the areas, the resources assigned to areas with high concentrations of minority and persons of color are as good as those with low concentrations. We're just off in terms of lighting at bus stops, though there's some issues with that database, so we need to dig into that over the next year. The one that we are not meeting target is vehicle assignment, where slightly older buses tend to be on those bus lines that serve higher concentrations of minority and low income. And so that's something we'll be looking into. Vehicles are assigned for lots of different technical reasons, and it's going to take some real work to figure out how to adjust that in terms of addressing this need. The other thing that you've already talked about is ridership, which is down. The March numbers, which you just heard about, came out the day after I had to go to print for this, so I have the February numbers. But again, down around 2% compared to the previous year. And to Director Stovall's point, this is not our only measure. This is why we have a number of measures, but it is an important one, of course. Looking at some of the other measures, we are seeing some success. And one of the things that I'll be trying to do with the business plan is to make sure that we're paying attention to the right ones, and we're thinking about there are many measures in here. Not every single one is just as important as the other. We need to pay attention to all of them, but some of them we need to pay more attention to than others. And I'm happy to say some of the coverage ones are headed in the right direction. You'll see in the plan. We also updated our key strategic actions in measures where we don't seem to be quite heading in the right direction that we want to. We've looked at revamping those or updating. In places where we are headed in the right direction, we're refreshing and moving on to what needs to happen for the next year. And as I said, those early efforts are showing some positive results. So what's next? Well, this draft is now out for, of course, your review, but also internal employee review and external public review. And that is kind of open for comment from any quarters until the end of May. And then we'll bring back a finalized version with whatever edits and adjustments are needed to the June board meeting. That would be the plan. And then going forward beyond June, there is a board strategy session that's tentatively scheduled for the very end of summer in September, where we would plan to bring you some more discussion and allow discussion amongst you to give us some advice and guidance about how to think strategically for future year updates. And then adjust the timing of this so that it can be strategic and inform our discussion throughout the year as we're working on what to focus in on and what to make as priority, so that we can advance that strategy to support 2020 and beyond. With that, I'll stop and see if there are questions or additional comments from Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. What I might comment on that one is the intention here is to really try and help us get strategy ahead of the finance side of the budgeting process. So that's what you see here, where we historically would have the November board retreat or strategy session. We may still collectively elect to do that, but we really think it's important to understand the year in review and to help inform what worked, what didn't work, what adjustments should be considered But to start to put this, I'll call August/September session, that I think it's September 12th, you have now hopefully placed in your calendars, for us and for management to work with you and get your viewpoints on the strategy of the business, i.e. safety, security. What things should we be considering before we start building budgets? So we in fact find the financial and activity side fits the strategy side of our business. So that you'll see is a bit of a difference where strategy should lead finance, not finance lead strategy. And they should go together in my opinion. So, but comments welcome, of course.
Are there any comments from the board? Any questions and comments? Seeing none, Alan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate the update. I think the path that we have going forward is the right path, making sure we get this ahead of kind of the budgeting, the finance, because where we budget generally it's what gets done. I think Director Simmons is one of the ones that highlighted moving up this process to ensure we got it ahead of the finance so that we can make sure that we've got the things and the initiatives funded that we want to move forward with. Well, if there are no other comments or questions from the board, I believe we are done. I want to thank the board for all of your contribution this morning. Of course, as always, thank the public for your attendance and the staff and our team for everything that you do to make these meetings come together flawlessly. So we thank everybody that contributes to this effort.
Thank you.
It's really strong.
Cool. Thank you.
That's it.
Okay.